Hi everyone, thanks for joining us again. This is Reading Time with Pickle. We are continuing on our supernatural journey through Asylum by author Madeleine Roux. Where we left off last time was Dan is yet again back in the basement exploring the secrets of the basement. I've mentioned this before, and I'm not going to drone on and on, but again, characterization. Dan and Abby's characters are weak. Not too much action. The story's kind of slow. It just kind of creeps along. Not too much suspense. It's just you get one little nugget of information here, another nugget of little information there. Nothing really happens. So in these next couple chapters, again, I hope that we get some more actual characterization from Dan, from Abby. One important plot point in the last video is that it has, for the most part, been semi-confirmed that Dan was/is the warden, or at least he has those memories. So let's see how this plays into these next chapters. So let's just dive right in. Chapter number 22. "It's me," Abby said. She was kneeling beside him. "It's okay. You're all right now. You're all right." "How long have I been out?" he said, touching a sore spot on his head where he must have bumped it. He saw that he was on the floor near the file cabinet, surrounded by scattered papers. "I don't know," she said. "I just got here and you were lying on the ground." She looked so concerned that it made him feel better, and maybe it was the relief of seeing her worried face, or the relief that it was her and not some ghost of the past. She looked so concerned that it made him feel better. And maybe it was the relief of seeing her worried face, or the relief that it was her and not some ghost of the past made real. Dan didn't know and he didn't care, but suddenly he reached up, pulled her in, and kissed her. It surprised them both. "Oh, well," Abby breathed. She tasted like Altoids and cherry lip balm. "I guess we can stop pretending to hate each other now, huh?" "I guess so," Dan replied. She smiled down at him. "And can we just pretend I never said that stuff about you being a weirdo?" "Wait a minute, what stuff?" he asked. Abby swatted him lightly on the chest. As nice as it was to see her smiling and laughing again, Dan really didn't remember her calling him a weirdo. Did he block that out, or did she mean she said it to some of her art friends, or to Ash? Dan shook his head. He wasn't going down that road, not anymore. He had kissed her, and it was as good as he could ever have hoped. "We should get out of here," Abby said. "This place gives me the creeps." She helped Dan get up. His head hurt, and he felt more than a little dizzy. "Hey," he said suddenly. "What were you doing down here anyway?" Abby looked a little embarrassed. I went to your room after dinner just to see you and apologize for the way that I've been acting. You weren't there, so I got worried that you'd come down here by yourself. I guess I just wanted to make sure you were okay." Dan reached out and took Abby's hand, and she gave it a squeeze. They walked up the stepped rows, back at the top. Dan stopped to flick off the lights. He turned around and took one more look at the now dark chamber. Two bright spots glowed from the far corner. Just a trick of the eye, just imprints of the light bulbs left behind, not the eyes of men watching. Dan shut the door quickly behind him. "What's the holdup?" Abby asked. Dan moved next to her. "Nothing," he said. "Nothing. Let's just get out of here. Are you hungry? I've got some amazingly stale snack cakes up in my room." Sounds delicious, Abby said, leaning into him. It's a date. I'm just going to comment right here. Why is the romance shoehorned, just crammed into this novel? It's like you're packing your suitcase to go on vacation into the trunk of your car and it doesn't fit, and you're just like elbowing it in. That's what the romance is in this novel. Where the hell did that kiss come from? And snap, snap, snap. Abby's hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold. Oh, they're on another date. I think this story would be so much stronger if they didn't force this very weak, watery romance into this book. This romance really has nothing to do with the plot of this story. It's just in there. And it makes no sense. Like, can't they just be friends? Jesus Christ. Like, what was this? This was probably the worst chapter in the entire book. It's 2 pages. I don't know. I have no words for this chapter. I'm sorry. Chapter number 23. When they got to the final door, Dan felt he was done with the basement for good. Thank you. When they got to the final door, Dan felt he was done with the basement for good. What mattered now was Abby and how warm her hand felt in his own. They would fix things with Jordan, and he would finish the summer with his best friends, out in the sunshine, away from all this gloom. Dan's euphoria was short-lived. Something had gone terribly wrong on the first floor. Police were swarming everywhere, and the entrance hall was flooded with students. One girl was crying hysterically. The lights made Dan's eyes hurt after the blackness of the basement. Exchanging a worried glance, Dan and Abby did their best to blend in with the crowd. A tall police officer crossed in front of them, almost bumping into them. He barely spared them a glance and rapidly moved across the hall, shouldering students out of the way. The crowd parted for him slowly. He reached the crying girl and took her by the shoulders, talking to her gently. What the? Dan and Abby tried to see what was going on, but the crowd was just too dense to move more than a few feet. Another police officer rushed in through the front door. Dan could see the flashing blue and red lights of the police cars parked outside. It looked like there were 4 or 5 of them. Move out of the way, the officer thundered. This is a crime scene. Move outside now. She and the tall policeman started herding the kids outside onto the lawn. The students shuffled slowly, bottlenecking at the front door. Dan and Abby moved along with the crowd, following the officer's instructions. Police? Abby whispered. The color had drained from her face. Let's try to find out what happened. Outside, a third policeman was now talking to the crying girl. Everyone else stood in groups, conversing in hushed whispers. Dan finally spotted Yi and Jordan. Jordan didn't look too good. He glared at Dan and Abby and then disappeared into the crowd. What's going on? Asked Dan. Yi looked at Dan with a surprise. Your roomie found a dead guy on the stairs. One of the hall monitors, Jake, George, Joe? Dan blurted out, and Abby covered her mouth. Yeah, that's it, Joe. Your boy Felix was coming back from a late-night run and found him. Looked like he'd been dead for a while. A while couldn't have been that long, surely. Dan had seen Joe in the halls just before he went into the basement. That was, what, an hour ago? Maybe less? Dan needed to figure out how long he'd been down there. Yi was saying, at least that was what it looked like when I saw him. You saw him? Abby said, horrified. Yi nodded. Just a glimpse. After Felix started screaming, eyes open, wide open, just staring. It was so freaking creepy. Jordan saw him too. Joe was standing propped up in the stairwell with one hand on the railing and another holding his cell phone, like a sculpture. "Hey," Yi said suddenly, startling them both. "Where were you guys anyway? How is it you didn't know?" "We weren't doing anything," Abby said too quickly. Then she glanced up at Dan. "Yes," he said. "That sounded as guilty as you think it did." "Crap. All right, fine, you're right." She looked at her feet. "We were making out, okay?" Dan wasn't going to argue with that exaggeration. He liked it quite a lot, in fact. It was a clever cover, too. This way no one would know they'd actually been exploring the old wing. "In the old wing?" Yi asked. Abby shrugged. "You two are weird as hell," Yi muttered. Then he said, I'm worried about Jordan. Seeing Joe definitely freaked him out. I mean, it's freaked all of us out. But he wasn't looking too good before. These days he hardly talks to me and he's always working on math. And I'm pretty sure it's not even for a class." "Do you think his nightmares are getting to him?" Abby asked. "Yeah, he keeps waking up in the middle of the night. And I think there might be stuff with his parents, like they found out he was here or something. Anyway, I get the feeling it's way worse than he's letting on. I just hope he's got a place to go back to. Yi paused. "Are you two keeping an eye on him?" Abby and Dan exchanged a worried look. Since they'd all gone their separate ways, they had no idea that Jordan had gotten this bad. Dan felt guilty. He should have checked on Jordan, even though Jordan had withdrawn. "Yeah, we're keeping an eye on him," Dan said. "We are now, anyway." More policemen arrived. They began sectioning off the students, arranging them in smaller, more manageable groups, probably for interviews. Shit. Why did he feel so guilty? "Dan, buddy, you feeling okay? You just got a little green." Yi punched his arm lightly. "Me? I'm fine." "What are you talking about?" Abby demanded, looking up at him. "Clearly, none of us are fine." Two cops, the tall one and the police officer who had moved everyone outside, reached where they were standing and herded their group over to a tree. "Better come up with a believable story," Yi said softly, "before Mulder and Scully over there get a go at you. You don't want them knowing you're in the Forbidden Zone." Yi turned to talk with another kid, but Dan could hardly move. What if he was right? Were they really going to be interrogated? Of course they're going to question you. Someone was murdered. "We weren't in the old wing," Dan said, grabbing Abby's arm. "We were in the second-floor lounge, the one by your room. We have to get our story straight, or they might think we had something to do with..." He couldn't bring himself to say it. "But we weren't anywhere near the second floor." She looked at him strangely. "Why would we need a story?" He took her by the forearm, tugging her away from the other students. "Just trust me, okay? Think about it. We were both out wandering late at night. Joe's a big guy, so they probably won't suspect you could overpower him. But the two of us..." "Hey, I resent that," Abby said, yanking her arm out of his grasp. "I might be a little on the petite side. Tiny. Whatever, it doesn't matter, Dan. I'm stronger than I look, and it's not like you're some kind of muscle-bound Hulk. So I don't see why you'd be a suspect, and I wouldn't." "Why are we arguing about this?" he whispered. "You're Wonder Woman, okay? You're Sam Black Widow. Abby, say it." She crossed her arms, cocking one hip to the side. "You're Black Widow times 10. Happy now? And Jesus, why aren't you more freaked out?" "I am freaked out," Abby squeaked, giving him a little shove. "I'm seriously freaked out. This is what I do when I'm freaked out. I babble inanely. I babble inanely to distract myself from the freaking out." Okay. He hoped nobody had heard that. They both sounded guilty, even if they weren't. Well, not guilty of murder, just guilty of having poor judgment and a blatant disregard for the loose curfew rules. You knew that at least, right? Poor Felix. I hope he's not too traumatized, she said, turning to search the crowd. Do you see him? No, Dan said. I'm sure he's being questioned by the police. Gird your loins. Yi was back. He slid up to them, talking out of the corner of his mouth. I got Mulder and Scully on my 6. Dan took a deep breath, preparing to unleash a whole mouthful of bullshit on officers of the law. They separated him from Abby, the policewoman taking her aside, while Dan went with the tall guy. The whole process was surprisingly quick and painless. He was asked standard questions: where he was, what he heard and saw, if he could remember any strangers around the dorm that day. Dan answered vaguely, mentioning he was on the 2nd floor with his friend, and that he had seen Joe earlier that day, but hadn't noticed anyone suspicious loitering in Brookline. Thanks, the cop told him when the questions ran out. If you see anything strange, anything at all out of the ordinary, you tell someone. Okay, son? Okay, thanks, sir. Dan wandered away, none. He had just lied through his teeth to a cop. Why? Exploring the basement wasn't the same as murder. It just wasn't. He had to keep reminding himself of that over and over again. Forget about your freaking alibi. Whoever did this is still out there. The officer finished speaking to Abby a moment later. As Dan waited for her, he heard one of the cops talking to another in low tones. Probably some bum, he was saying. They're always getting blind drunk and wandering up onto campus. We'll find him in a bush outside. Just you wait. Dan wondered how a stranger could get into the dorm, considering the front door is locked automatically from outside. Could I have your attention, please? Dan recognized the director from the first couple of days. He had been all smiles then. Now he looked ragged, still rumpled from sleep, and shaken to the core. If I could have your attention, he repeated, standing on the first step of the entranceway. The students quieted down and the police officers moved away. Thank you. All right, I know it's been a difficult night for everyone. First thing in the morning, your parents will be notified of the situation. Right now, we need to do what's best for you, our faculty, staff, and of course, what's best for Joe McMullen's family. The police will conduct a full search of the building tonight, and an officer will be stationed on each floor to make certain you are all safe. I'm sure many of you have questions, and I'm happy to stay and assist you however I can. To the rest of you, be safe and vigilant, and cooperate fully with the Camford police. And let us keep Joe's family in our thoughts tonight. At this, the sound of crying rippled through the crowd. In front of Dan, 2 girls clung to each other, sobbing. Students swarmed around the director, shouting questions until he ordered them to calm down and speak one by one. Dismissed by the policewoman, Abby walked over to Dan. I don't think she even wrote down half of what I said. Whatever, I'm ready for bed. It's not even funny. Although I don't suppose there's any way I'm going to fall asleep. She shuddered. I wish this were just a nightmare that we could wake up from. Anyway, see you tomorrow? She took his hand and squeezed it. Dan squeezed back. Yeah, try to get some sleep. We'll talk tomorrow. Text if you need me. With heavy steps, Abby followed a police officer who was leading the students to a back staircase to their rooms, since the main stairs were cordoned off with police tape. The body had been moved, but for the time being it was still a crime scene. Dan trudged up the stairs behind her, beyond exhausted, wishing he had a moment to properly remember their kiss and forget that he was at Brookline altogether. At Brookline, where a murderer was wandering free. Felix was not in chapter number 24. Felix was not in the room when Dan got there. Still being questioned by the police, Dan thought. He was just wondering if they'd let Felix come back that night at all when the door opened and Felix walked in. He immediately went to his bed, curled up on it, and hugged his knees to his chest. He was still wearing a t-shirt and running shorts. He looked vulnerable and scared. "Oh God, Felix, I'm really sorry," Dan said. "Nobody should have to see something like that." On the bed, Felix was shaking, rattling the whole bed frame. "Do you want to talk about it?" Felix shook his head. It looked like if he opened his mouth, he would start crying. "If you need to talk or anything, you know where to find me. Anytime." Felix didn't respond. In a fog, Dan went through the motions of brushing his teeth and getting ready for bed. A police officer patrolled the hallway. His hand was on his holster. It made Dan walk very carefully down the hall. Back in the room, Felix had surprisingly fallen asleep. Dan turned off the light and got into bed in the clothes he was wearing. He didn't want to risk waking Felix by changing. Besides, it wasn't like he would be able to sleep anyway. As he lay down, he heard a crunching noise. He reached into the pouch of his hoodie and pulled out a few sheets of paper. He had no idea how they had got there. Dimly, he remembered seeing a set of cabinets in the operating amphitheater, but he had passed out with that vision before reaching them. Was this another memory gap? Weird, though, because he really couldn't remember even making it across the room. He had an odd thought. What if Abby had put them in his pocket while he was still unconscious? He knew that there had been papers on the ground when he came to. Did she read them and already know about Lucy? But surely she would have said something if she did. And he couldn't think of any reason why she would put the papers in his pocket. There was enough light coming through the window that Dan didn't need to switch on his bedside lamp. He smoothed the crumpled papers on his pillow. They were the same kind of memos that he'd already seen. Dan reached the last piece of paper. The handwriting jumped out at him. The warden. "A flash of inspiration this morning over breakfast there is. I think, a way in which my ideas can live on forever. All men seek immortality in their own way, either through a legacy of children carrying their name and genetic material, through architecture, through science, and this now is simply my search for a legacy like no other. The work will be grisly, true, I've no doubt about that, yet Michelangelo had secret cadavers, and so too must I, an artist of a different sort, risk and sacrifice." So the warden had been performing grisly sacrifices on his patients in order to create a legacy for his name. Dan thought back to the index cards. Dan thought back to the index cards they'd looked at in the warden's office. So many of them with an N under the recovered box. How many operations had failed? How many patients had been needlessly subjected to pain and terror, all for the sake of the warden searching for a kind of immortality? Dan kept reading. "I always hated that word, sacrifice. It conjures images of savages beating drums around a fire. But sacrifices there must be, and how dear, and how dangerous." That was the end of the entry. But there was more writing on the back, and in the warden's now familiar handwriting, and at the bottom, a signature, 2 words, Daniel Crawford. Chapter number 25. The police found the man who'd killed Joe the next day, in a bar downtown with Joe's wallet in a garrote. The director held a meeting in Wilford Commons to tell the student body that they were safe now. but that if any of them wanted to go home, they would get a full refund. Classes would resume the next day. There would be counselors standing by if students needed someone to talk to. Dan found Abby and asked her if she wanted to go for a walk. The yard outside Wilford lacked its usual mob of kids playing frisbee or lawn bowling. Everyone on campus was in a somber mood. They decided to get away from the campus for a while, so they took a path that led to the forest. As soon as they had gone a couple yards, the air got cooler and the light dimmer from the riot of trees arching above them. "How's Felix holding up?" Abby said after a while. Dan shrugged. He didn't really know. "He wasn't there when I woke up, and I didn't see him in the commons. Maybe he's seeing one of the counselors." "How about you? You feel okay?" Abby slipped her hand into his. "Yeah," Dan lied. Tell her everything. Stop holding everything in." But really, how could he tell her? "Hey, so it turns out there was this one warden behind all the horrible shit here, and oh, guess what? We have the same name. Oh, and I've been having these dreams like I'm seeing through his eyes. No biggie." At least Dan finally knew why Sal Weathers and his wife had gotten so angry when he told them his name. "Jordan's not answering his phone," Abby said, interrupting his thoughts. The pine needles crunched under their feet. "I texted him last night when I got to my room and again this morning. I assume he heard the news that they found the guy, although I'm not sure he's left his room. I got one reply: busy with homework. I don't get why he's being so strange, so unlike the kid I met on the bus. Maybe he needs to be alone for a while. I mean, he saw the body." "Maybe, but I keep thinking about what Yi said, about us watching out for him. I'm just worried, you know. I worry," she said. "I'll try him again later. Can't hurt to try, right?" Dan didn't see her for the rest of the day. Back in his room, he found himself staring at the wall, his thoughts in a jumble. When his phone rang in his pocket, he nearly jumped out of his skin. "Chill out, Dan. It's just your parents." He picked up the phone, already knowing what was coming. "Oh, Danny, we just got off the phone with your program director who tells us that a boy has been killed right in your very dorm. What is going on? Do you need us to—" His mother's voice came out in a panicked rush. He jumped to interrupt her. Hey, listen, they caught the guy, okay?" He realized he was almost shouting and lowered his voice. "I'm fine. We're all safe now. They've got counselors and stuff, and they caught the guy who did it." The director said they had a suspect in custody, she said shrilly. "He didn't sound nearly as sure as you do." Dan had to sound sure, not just for his mother, but for himself. It was hard to ignore that while he'd been out cold having a vision about the sculptor 2 floors up, Joe was, well, being sculpted. If they really thought we were in danger, they'd shut down the program and send us home. Dan spoke with as much authority as he could muster, desperately hoping Sandy would take him at his word. "I suppose that's true. I'm just heartsick thinking of you there. You're with your friends? You're okay?" "I'm okay, and Abby and Jordan are too, sort of. I promise." "Okay. Well, if you're sure." "Hey, while I have you guys on the phone, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Danny. Let me just put you on speakerphone." He heard a click, and it suddenly got very loud on the other end. "Hi, Dad." "What do you need, Danny?" Paul asked. Where to start? "I just had a question about my family history, I guess. I mean, the stuff before you guys. Stuff from when I was younger. I was looking up some of the history about this place, because, the dorm used to be a psych ward and all. And it turns out The warden here was also named Daniel Crawford. Careful now. I thought that was a interesting coincidence. Do you know if there's any possible relation? Dan, his father said soothingly. I mean, really, do you need us to come get you? We can get on a plane right now and come get you. It's no problem. What? No, that's not what I'm serious. This whole thing doesn't feel right to me. You should come home. You're not, always so good with stuff like this, his father said. It had been a while since Dan had heard him sound so worried. Danny, sweetie, your father's just concerned. We both are, his mom added. Do we need to call Dr. Oberst? If you think this might trigger some sort of episode. But I didn't say anything about wanting to come home. Psych wards and wardens, and what about you, Danny? It doesn't sound like you're taking care of yourself. It was his dad again, and from the sound of it, he was working himself up into an angry froth. Calm down, Paul. Danny, we're worried about you, that's all. We're just trying to tell you that if you want to leave, we think that it would be a good, rational decision. We always knew that this might be too much for you. Look, never mind, don't call Dr. Oberst. Don't worry about me. I have to get going. He hung up the phone over their protests. Paul and Sandy had always told him that the most they could give him about his birth parents was non-identifying information, like the fact they'd been college-educated and healthy and no other kids. But apparently, all you had to do was check a little box saying you didn't want to divulge your identity, and suddenly it took a good reason and a court order to get anywhere. Frankly, Dan had never cared to know who his good-for-nothing parents were. Paul and Sandy were more than great. They had come to feel like family. But suddenly, finding out his history felt like the most important thing in the world. The missing piece in this maddening puzzle, the link between Dan and a ruthless killer. Of all the places he could have ended up this summer, it couldn't be a mistake that he'd chosen this one. Brookline was his destiny. It was in his blood. And we will end this evening's reading with chapter 25. We'll be beginning chapter 26 next. Now, knowing the plot of stories and novels, and how much we have left in this novel, about 40%, I would say. It's 40 to 33. It's definitely not. The suspect of Joe's killer is false. The killer is still out there. Because what's the point? Like, Joe just died. There's no other significance to the novel. The killer is definitely still out there. Now, Jordan, everyone is slightly suspect. Jordan's becoming increasingly reclusive. Abby is obsessive and suddenly in love with Dan. Dan has blackouts and visions. Really, everyone is a suspect. I still do not trust Felix 100%, even though he seems completely traumatized at this point. I'm going to make a wild guess about the killer and say that the killer is Dennis Haimline, and that there's some type of link going on. The warden talks about sacrifices and immortality. What if the warden moved his consciousness somehow into Dan? And what if Lucy Valdez's, the little girl's consciousness, was somehow moved into Abby? And maybe that's why Abby is so obsessed about her. And what if Dennis Haimline's consciousness was somehow moved into Jordan or into Felix? That doesn't make sense, but I guess it would make sense in terms of this novel. I do think that either Jordan or Felix is the culprit. I really can't see anyone else. Um, I don't think it's Dan. It's kind of pointing to it possibly being Dan. I don't think it's Dan. Because the sculptor and the warden are two different people, or so it would have you believe right now. Anyways, we'll end this discussion in this chapter at 25. Thank you as always for listening and for joining us on Reading Time with Pickle. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening.